Kia ora. Okay, bear with me, everybody. Okay, sharing that to... and to... Come on. One more share, bear with me. Anybody who's online at the moment? Okay. Kia ora. Kia ora, everybody. Got a couple of people online. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I want to start off by, for those who haven't heard, today was a pretty big day. We managed to get our council to unanimously vote to undertake an anti-racism journey. And I'm really thrilled. And I want to acknowledge the work that was put in by everybody leading up to this point. When I say everybody, I mean the generations who have come before me that have dealt with Gisborne District Council, that have suffered because of racist policies that have come out of council, and that have stood up for our people. And so all the way up to just a few weeks ago with the amazing peaceful protest against the memorials. Yeah. And so without everybody doing their bit and working within the council, all of the councillors and the staff, our CEO, who has been really open to this conversation, Nadine Thatcher-Swan, and the staff and council also who work to make it a better place, and our councillors, Meredith Akuhata-Brown, Joshua Wharehinga and his support today, Tony Robinson and his support and allyship, Councillor Dowsing gave a really stirring cordial about supporting this decision. So it's a momentous decision, and it's just the beginning of a journey, and it's going to be one that will have pitfalls. It'll be a learning journey for us all, but it's such an honourable pathway to take, and an important, just pathway to take. So it's been a really great day. And then on top of that, they also voted to make a commitment to reviewing the electoral system. And within that, there will be a review of whether to have Māori wards, which is, again, we will be having our discussion around just representation for our people in local council. So it was a good day. And we're I think we deserve a good day at the moment. And so, yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge everybody that's put into getting us to this point. Tonight's reading. Tonight's reading is, well, I chose Ibram X. Kendi, who is one of two authors that I drew really heavily from today. The first one was Ijeoma Oluo, and yeah, I actually, in my nerves today, I skipped the line that mentioned her, that she was who I was referencing, but I drew heavily from her work today in my deputation, as well as Ibram X. Kendi, who talks a lot about and has put a lot of work into understanding the function of policy and perpetuating racism and driving racial disparity at a population level. So I'm going to read from Ibram X. Kendi. I read from Ijeoma Oluo last week, and I am going to read from Ibram X. Kendi today. And it's from his book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And it's chapter 17, and it's on success. Finance scholar Boyce Watkins lectured on racism as a disease. I agonized over this conception, not foundational enough, eternal enough, revolutionary enough on this 11th evening of Black History Month in 2010. When the question and answer period arrived, I tossed up my arm from the back row as Caridad smiled. Caridad and I had been whispering for most of the lecture. For once, I felt confidence tingling in my head. Days before, Professor Aunty had hooded me with my doctoral degree at Temple's commencement. The teen who hated school had finished graduate school in 2010 and committed himself to school for life. Caridad was probably the one who ushered me to the lecture at Soni Oneonta, our state college in the town of Oneonta. At Oneonta, whiteness surrounded me like clouds from a plane's window, which didn't mean I found no white colleagues who were genial and caring. But it was Caridad and all of her Puerto Rico feminism and anti-racism who took me by the arm when I arrived as a dissertation fellow in 2008 and brought me closer when I stayed in 2009. We were bound to become as close as our chairs. I filled the Black History post left vacant by Caridad's husband of 18 years, Ralph. Metastatic cancer had taken Ralph's black body in 2007. She probably could not look at me without seeing me standing in Ralph's shoes. Her husband lost his fight to cancer, but Caridad's life as an Afro-Latinx woman had brought its own fights for peace, to be still. But she was a fighter, tireless and durable as anti-racists must be to succeed. Success, the dark road we fear, where anti-racist power and policy predominate, where equal opportunities and thus outcomes exist between equal groups, where people blame policy, not people, for societal problems, where nearly everyone has more than they have today, where racist power lives in the margins like anti-racist power does today, where anti-racist ideas are our common sense, like racist ideas are today. Neither failure nor success is written. The story of our generation will be based on what we are willing to do. Are we willing to endure the grueling fight against racist power and policy? Are we willing to transform anti-racist power that we gather within us to anti-racist power in our society? Caridad was willing, which strengthened my will. Caridad understood that even as her students struggled with racist and gender racist and queer racist and class racist ideas, they also had within them the capacity to learn and change. Meanwhile, I fought to survive at the intersections. The impulses of my bigoted past constantly threatened to take me back to the plantation of racist power. Instead of describing racism as a disease, don't you think racism is more like an organ? I asked the lecturer. Isn't racism essential for America to function? Isn't the system of racism essential for America to live? I was not much of an intellectual. I closed myself off to new ideas that did not feel good, meaning I shopped for conceptions of racism that fit my ideology and self-identity. I'm going to stop there for a second and reflect on this, because when I read this, this is what, and I think about it in light of today's decision and the journey that we have ahead of us. It is grueling to confront racism. It is grueling to commit yourself to anti-racism. And one of the counselors said today, he wasn't there at the meeting that we had last week. This is Councillor Burdett, but he still felt it appropriate to hold me accountable for what other people said to other councillors that they complained to him about, but haven't spoken to me about or to anybody else, which was a little quite confusing for me. And in the end, obviously, I'm not going to answer for what other people said, especially to somebody who didn't show up at the meeting. And so, and in fact, there was a lot of beautiful moments in that meeting, but it was grueling. And this whole process is going to be grueling. And that particular counsellor said, well, I hope it's going to be like the workshop that we had last time. I mean, if he doesn't like being made to feel uncomfortable, I don't think it is going to be like that last workshop that he had last time. I don't know that he will enjoy this journey. I don't think you should find it an enjoyable journey. I think you'd be a bit sick if you enjoyed hearing about how racism costs lives, costs children, costs families. So, and I also don't want us to fool ourselves in going down this journey that it's going to be easy for us either. I'm going to be challenged. People who believe that they already have it all figured out, Māori will be challenged, and we need to challenge ourselves in this way as well, to consider how we perpetuate racism. It was a Māori counsellor who posed those questions to me today. It was a Māori counsellor who started off by saying, racism cuts both ways, straight after I finished talking about the fact that even though everybody can be racist, it is powered differently within white supremacist racist systems. And so, you know, it will be a difficult journey, I think, for all of us. Beautifully challenging and transformative. It will break us open. It'll bring our insides out, and we'll grow like a seed in a sometimes traumatic fashion. So, yeah, I just wanted to reflect on that. This journey is going to require humility for all of us, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. Asking anti-racists to change their perspective on racism can be as destabilizing as asking racists to change their perspective on race. Anti-racists can be as doctrinaire in their view of racism as racists can be in their view of not racism. How can anti-racists ask racists to open their minds and change when we are closed-minded and unwilling to change? I derived my perspective on racism from a book I first read in graduate school when both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders spoke of institutional racism on the presidential campaign trail in 2016. When the activists who demonstrated at their events spoke of institutional racism, they were using, whether they realized it or not, a formulation coined in 1967 by Black Power activist Kwame Ture and political scientist Charles Hamilton in Black Power, The Politics of Liberation in America. Racism is both overt and covert, Ture and Hamilton explained. It takes two closely related forms, individual rights acting against individual Blacks and acts by total white community against the Black community. We call these individual racism and institutional racism. The first consists of overt acts by individuals. The second type is less overt, far more subtle, less identifiable in terms of specific individuals committing the acts. They distinguished, for example, the individual racism of white terrorists who bomb a Black church and kill Black children from the institutional racism of when that same city, Birmingham, Alabama, when in that same city of Birmingham, Alabama, 500 Black babies die each year because of the lack of proper food, shelter, and medical facilities. These are the definitions that Ijeoma Oluo draws from at the beginning of her book that I spoke to today. And these are the definitions that I placed in front of council to consider today, because many of them, including the councillor that questioned me, still draw from that overt racism model, which is harmful and deadly, but no more deadly or destructive than the other model, the institutional model, the covert model, the subtle model that is interwoven through policy and institutions and systems that result in population-wide deaths, high mortality rates. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that because some people were also asking me about the definitions that were placed in front of council today around racism. It is, as I thought upon first read, the gloomy system keeping us down and dead. The system's acts are covert, just as the racist ideas of the people are implicit. I could not wrap my head around the system or precisely define it, but I knew the system was there, like the polluted air in our atmosphere, poisoning Black people to the benefit of white people. But what if the atmosphere of the racism has been polluting most white people too? And what if racism has been working in the opposite way for a handful of Black individuals who find the fresh air of wealth and power in racist atmospheres? Framing institutional racism as acts by the total white community against the total Black community accounts for the ways white people benefit from racist policies when compared to their racial peers. But this framing of white people versus Black people does not take into account that all white people do not benefit equally from racism. For instance, it doesn't take into account how rich white people benefit more from racist policies than poor white people and middle-income white people. It does not take into account that Black people are not harmed equally by racism, or that some Black individuals exploit racism to boost their own wealth and privilege. I want to stop there because that also made me reflect in particular about how, some of the votes that took place today that relate to how we are represented in council around Māori wards, those votes and this issue has been raised around the country. And there are Māori and there are iwi leaders who are not fans of Māori wards. True story. There are some people in positions of leadership within Māoridom, within Aotearoa Māori, both in a corporate sense and a governance sense, who benefit greatly off systems of white supremacy and would like them to stay just the way that they are. And so, you know, the systemic racism is not a system that is just about benefiting white people and exploiting Black people. Sometimes it benefits brown people as well, or coloured people, coloured folk as well. And I believe that all racist systems ultimately harm all people, because those are the underpinnings of the systems of domination. From an Indigenous perspective, those are the underpinnings of the systems of domination that also impact the planet, that also define our relationship of domination over Papatua Nuku, Ranginui, Whangaroa. And ultimately that will be our undoing. So ultimately systems of racism impact everybody in a bad way. And I guess, you know, this is something that Ibram Kendi is articulating in his book. He's saying that, you know, it's not just about all white people benefiting and all brown people or Black people having to pay the price for that. It's a complex journey and a nuanced journey. So it did not take into account all of those things, but I did not care. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought of racism as an inanimate, invisible, immortal system, not as a living, recognizable, mortal disease of cancer cells that we could identify and treat and kill. I considered the system as essential to the United States as the Constitution. At times, I thought white people covertly operated the system, fixed it to benefit the total community at the expense of the total Black community. And I want to stop there again. So what he is talking about now is, can the United States exist without racism? He believed it could not. I believe that the United States as a nation state is inherently racist and is intrinsically racist because it exists off the back of Indigenous dispossession. And so in order for the land to go back to the Indigenous people, they would, whatever they do with it is up to them because it's theirs, and they may reinvent, and I wouldn't blame them for reinventing everything, and it would not necessarily be the United States that it is today. That's my reflection on it. But that said, that doesn't mean that racism cannot be overcome in the place that they currently call the United States, which I call Great Turtle Island. Yeah, it would just be very transformative. I believe it would be very transformative. It would necessarily be transformative. And until it is transformative in that space, it's still going to be there. Yeah. The construct of covert institutional racism opens American eyes to racism and ironically closes them too. Separating the overt individual from the covert institutional veils the specific policy choices that cause racial inequities, policies made by specific people. Covering up the specific policies and policymakers prevents us from identifying and replacing the specific policies and policymakers. We become unconscious to racist policymakers and policies as we lash out angrily at the abstract boogeyman of the system. I'm going to stop there again, because this is interesting stuff for us to talk about, and particularly at the moment in relation to COVID. We need to be mindful of the way in which we are perceiving information, the way that we perceive the abstract boogeyman. I have spoken quite a bit in the last few weeks. I've spoken out quite a bit because I've been really concerned and in my heart for the relationships in my whānau and for other people who've written to me about impacts on their relationships because of conspiracy theories about the boogeyman system being out to get them. And I understand where that comes from, because we have been done hard by in this system. We have been, you know, it's been a genocidal system against our people. And when you look at the historical log sheet of genocidal policy, it's quite clear that successive governments have had genocidal negligence towards us, and that there has been a level of intent at times around our assimilation, which is a form also of cultural genocide. And so I completely understand where the lack of trust comes from and the fear comes from as well, and the desire to protect and the instinct, the duty to protect. I understand where that comes from as well. That's in our DNA to stand up and protect our people. I totally get that. I'm one of the checkpoint whānau. We did that in our own way as well. But we need to establish those same checkpoints around our mind for the information that we let into our mind, because not just because it's just because it's asking you to stand up to the system doesn't mean it's in your best interests. And there is a lot of rhetoric and theory that actually calls for you to stand up and disrupt the system so that it can reestablish greater means of white supremacist control over our communities and ourselves. So we need to be very careful about who we hitch our wagons to in the name of tino rangatiratanga and in the name of justice. We need to be specific about, what parts of policy and what parts of the system we are railing against and how we're going to do that. Anyway. The perpetrators behind the 500 Black babies dying each year in Birmingham because of the lack of proper food and shelter and medical facilities were no less overt than the white terrorists who killed 4 Black girls in a Birmingham church in 1963. In the way investigators can figure out exactly who those church bombers were, investigators can figure out exactly what policies caused 500 Black babies to die each year and exactly who put those policies in place. In the way that people have learned to see racist abuse coming out of the mouths of individual racists, people can learn to see racial inequalities emerging from racist policies. All forms of racism are overt if our anti-racist eyes are open to seeing racist policy and racial inequity. So that's the reading for tonight. And that's the journey that's ahead of us, is to do that, is to look at those racist policies and how they produce racial inequities in our community, and to pull those layers back and to, as Arundhati Roy says, shine a light on this boogeyman and expose it in its brutish ugliness and get to understand it so that we can build better systems, kinder systems, less racist systems for our future generations with better, kinder, less racist policies. I think that's a much more prudent way to go about it rather than putting ourselves and our interests and each other at risk if we can. And I want to acknowledge there's not one way. Like, civil disobedience is important, but we need to be sure that our civil disobedience is informed from a space that's, makes sense to us and is not inadvertently feeding the MAGA machine. Yeah. Big ups for today, everybody. Thank you to everybody who participated in it over the weeks, months, and years that have led up to today's decision, and really looking forward to the journey that we have ahead. It's not a cure-all. It's going to be hard. There's going to be mistakes along the way, but we're making the commitment. So, kia ora, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for coming along tonight. Pō Mārie.